Drive past an Amish farm in early July, and you'll notice something that should be impossible. Row after row of lush, unbothered vegetables. No yellowing leaves riddled with aphid damage, no squash vines collapsed under beetle pressure, no tomato plants wearing the sad, chewed-up look that most backyard gardeners have just accepted as normal. And here's what makes it stranger. They're not spraying anything. No bottles, no tanks, no early morning chemical misting routine. Just the plants, the soil, and something you'd walk right past without a second glance. I want you to hold that image in your mind, because it's going to matter a lot by the end of this. Every single year, American gardeners spend over $3 billion on pesticides, and the pest problem keeps getting worse. Think about that for a second. $3 billion, and the insects are still winning. If the products worked, that number would be going down. Instead, it goes up every single year. You spend more, they come back stronger, and somewhere in a boardroom, somebody is calling that a business model. Here's the frustrating part. You've probably done everything right. You read the labels, you followed the schedules, you bought the organic version, then the non-organic version, then went back to organic again when you felt guilty. You tried companion planting tips you found in a magazine, and every summer you end up standing in your garden watching your cabbage get turned into lacework by caterpillars you never even saw arrive. It makes me genuinely angry because the solution has been sitting in plain sight for over 200 years. And the industry that profits from your pest problem has done everything quietly possible to make sure you'd keep reaching for a bottle instead of a branch. In the farming communities of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there's a practice so old that most Amish elders can't even remember when it started. They just say it's always been done. It involves cutting specific branches from specific trees at a specific time of year and laying them at the base of garden rows in a pattern that looks, honestly, like nothing special at all. To an outsider walking by, it looks like someone was too lazy to clean up after trimming a tree. But to the insects that would otherwise devastate those crops, it's a wall they don't cross. The method has been passed down through generations, not because people wrote it in books, but because it worked. Season after season, decade after decade, it worked. Communities that couldn't afford to lose a harvest, communities where a failed crop wasn't an inconvenience but a genuine threat to survival, relied on this method completely. And they never stopped using it because they never had a reason to. The specific branches most commonly used are from elder trees, the common elderberry, Sambucus nigra, though communities in different regions adapted the practice to whatever was locally available, including walnut, wormwood, and certain aromatic herbs grown in woody form. The elder branch in particular has a long, well-documented place in traditional European and early American agricultural practice. When Amish communities established themselves in Pennsylvania in the early 1700s, they brought this knowledge with them. And for more than 3 centuries, it's been sitting quietly in their gardens while the rest of us went looking for answers in a spray bottle. Here's the question. Nobody in the gardening world wants you to ask, if this method works, why isn't it on every seed packet, every gardening show, every YouTube channel with a corporate sponsor? Follow the money. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's just logic. The pesticide and garden chemical industry in the United States generates somewhere between $4 and $5 billion annually from home gardeners alone. Not commercial agriculture. Home gardeners. People with backyard plots and raised beds and container gardens on apartment balconies. That's the market we're talking about. And that market depends entirely on you not having a free, permanent solution that you can get by walking to the nearest tree. When the agrochemical industry began its aggressive expansion into the home garden market in the 1950s and 60s, traditional farming knowledge started getting quietly crowded out. Not banned, not destroyed, just edged aside. University extension programs began favoring chemical recommendations because the chemical companies funded the research. Garden magazines ran articles written by people with industry ties. The local knowledge, the kind passed down on porches and at harvest fairs and in letters between farming families, started getting labeled as folk wisdom, old-fashioned, unscientific, the kind of thing your grandmother believed, not something a modern gardener needed to take seriously. And it worked. Within 2 generations, most American gardeners had completely lost access to methods that farming families had relied on for centuries, not because the methods stopped working, because someone realized they couldn't sell you something you already had for free. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Branches? That's it? Let me show you exactly why this works, and once you understand the mechanism, you'll be frustrated it took this long to find out. Elder branches, and several other aromatic woody plants, contain compounds in their bark, leaves, and sap that are profoundly disruptive to the nervous and respiratory systems of soft-bodied insects. Aphids, caterpillars, whiteflies, flea beetles, cucumber beetles, all of them have a sensitivity to these compounds that functions almost like an alarm system. When the concentration in the surrounding air or on nearby surfaces reaches a certain threshold, Those insects get a signal that says, danger, do not feed here, find somewhere else. Think of it like a smoke detector for insects. You and I walk into a room with a faint smell and barely notice it, but the alarm goes off at a threshold calibrated to protect the house. These insects have chemical receptors that are calibrated to detect the compounds in elder branches at concentrations that are completely undetectable to us. We smell nothing. They detect a warning they're biologically programmed not to ignore. Here's the important part. The compounds don't kill them. That's actually why this is so durable as a method. It doesn't create resistance the way pesticides do. When you spray something that kills insects, you create evolutionary pressure. The survivors reproduce, and over time, you get populations that are resistant to that chemical. That's why you keep needing more or stronger formulations or something new entirely. But a repellent that doesn't kill, there's no selection pressure. There's no resistance that builds up over time. The method that worked in 1780 works in 2025 for the exact same reason, because the basic chemistry hasn't changed. This is also why the Amish never abandoned it. It doesn't stop working. All right, here's the part you came for. And I promise, if you've got 10 minutes and access to one tree, you have everything you need. Start by identifying your source. Elder trees, elderberry, are the gold standard here, but if you don't have access to one, common wormwood, southernwood, or even strongly aromatic artemisia varieties will give you meaningful results. Black walnut branches work particularly well for soil-level pests. If you're in the American South, or Southwest, you may have access to native artemisia species that your regional farming tradition already knows about. The key characteristic you're looking for is strong aromatic scent when you break or crush the leaves. That smell is your indicator of active compound concentration. Cut your branches in the morning if possible. This is when the sap concentration is highest and the compounds are most volatile. You want branches that are green and actively growing, not dried out and woody. The thickness should be roughly what you'd use as a walking stick, about the diameter of a large carrot. Cut them into lengths that match your garden rows, or roughly an arm's length if you're working around individual plants. Now lay them. Place the branches in a continuous line along the perimeter of your garden bed, directly on the soil, not propped up. You're creating a boundary, not a barrier. Some growers also lay single branches between plant rows at intervals of about a step's length apart. Don't overthink the placement. What you're doing is establishing a zone of scent concentration around your plants. The goal is coverage, not precision. For individual plants that are already showing pest pressure, a tomato with aphids, a squash vine getting hammered, take smaller branch segments and tuck them directly at the base of the plant stem, making a loose circle of material that surrounds the plant. Leave a few inches of space so you're not creating moisture problems against the stem itself. Replace the branches every 10 to 14 days, or sooner if they dry out and lose their scent. You'll be able to tell, crush a leaf. If the smell is faint or gone, it's time for fresh material. Some gardeners keep a small elder bush specifically for this purpose, pruning it throughout the season to keep fresh growth available. That single bush, essentially free to maintain, replaces an entire cabinet of chemicals. One thing people sometimes get wrong: they lay a few branches and then check back 3 days later expecting every insect to be gone. That's not how this works. You're not exterminating, you're relocating. The insects leave gradually as the environment stops feeling hospitable. Give it a full week before you evaluate. In most cases, by day 5 or 6, you'll notice the difference clearly. The fresh feeding damage stops. The first thing most people notice, usually within the first week, is that the aphids start relocating. This is actually visible if you look carefully. You'll see them clustered on the underside of leaves near the edges of your protected area, then fewer, then gone. The caterpillar pressure drops next, usually by the end of week 2. What you won't see is a dramatic die-off. What you will see is your plants just not getting eaten anymore. And after a few seasons of losing crops to things you couldn't control, that quite as remarkable. By the end of the first full month, if you've been consistent about replacing branches as they dry, you should be seeing the cumulative effect. Your garden has become an inhospitable address for the pest species that were previously treating it like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Some gardeners report that the benefits intensify in the second year as surrounding pest populations learn, at a population level, that this particular garden isn't worth investigating. There's no single dramatic moment, just a garden that works the way a garden is supposed to work. Let me ask you something straightforward. Why would a community that has survived and thrived and now entirely on their own food production for 2 centuries keep using something that didn't work? The Amish don't keep ineffective practices out of sentiment. They keep them because every method they use has to earn its place through results. These are communities with no margin for agricultural failure, no backup plan, no grocery store substitute, no chemical company rep to call when things go wrong. If the branch method didn't produce reliable pest protection, it would have been abandoned the same way any other failed technique gets abandoned. Quietly and completely. The fact that it's still in use today, unchanged from how it was practiced 200 years ago, is not a coincidence. It's evidence. And the cost comparison speaks for itself. The average American gardener spends somewhere between $200 and $400 a year on pest management products. Some spend significantly more. The branch method costs you nothing except the time to cut and replace material every couple of weeks. Over 5 years, you're looking at a potential difference of $1,000 or more, conservatively. And unlike a bottle of chemical spray, a branch doesn't have an expiration date, doesn't require protective equipment, doesn't wash into your soil and accumulate in your food, and doesn't need to be reformulated every few years because the insects adapted to it. The science behind why it works, the basic chemistry of plant-produced aromatic compounds and insect chemoreception, hasn't changed. It can't change. It's physics. It's biology. It was true in 1720, and it's true right now. Now here's where this gets even more useful, because this method isn't locked to one type of garden or one region of the country. If you're gardening in a hot, dry climate where elder doesn't grow natively, look for local Artemisia species, sagebrush relatives, native wormwood. The aromatic principle is the same. In the Pacific Northwest, you have access to native plants with similarly repellent properties. The Amish in different geographic communities adapted the core practice to what grew locally, and you can do the same. The principle is the constant. The specific plant material is the variable. For container gardeners or small space growers, scale down proportionally. A single branch segment tucked alongside each container plant can provide meaningful protection. For a balcony or patio garden, you don't need an acre of land for this to work. You need enough aromatic material to create a scent boundary around whatever you're growing. If you want to amplify the effect, combine elder branches with plantings of strong-smelling companion plants, basil, marigolds, catnip, along the border of your growing area. You're layering repellent signals, making your garden even less attractive as a destination. The Amish often do this instinctively. Their kitchen gardens tend to have fragrant herbs at the edges in a pattern that looks decorative but is actually functional. For anyone dealing with soil-level pests, cutworms, grubs, certain beetle larvae, supplement the branch method with a top layer of crushed or chopped aromatic material worked lightly into the surface of the soil. This brings the repellent compounds into direct contact with the environment where those pests operate. You came here today probably just curious about a gardening trick, but what you've actually just learned is something much bigger than that. You've learned that there is a 200-year-old, zero-cost pest management system that was quietly pushed aside not because it stopped working, but because it couldn't be sold. You've learned that the communities who kept using it, who never had the option of outsourcing their food security to a chemical company, have been proving it works every single growing season since before the United States was a fully formed nation. No cost, no chemicals, no complications. That's what this method gives you. And now you have it. Here's your one action for today. Before you do anything else, go outside and find either an elder tree, a wormwood plant, or any strongly aromatic shrub you have access to. Crush a leaf. If it smells sharp and distinctive, almost medicinal, you've found your material. Cut a few branches and put them at the base of whatever you're currently growing. That's the whole first step. You don't need to build anything, buy anything, or wait for a delivery. You start today. If you want more methods like this, techniques that farming communities have been using for generations, while the garden store industry hoped you'd keep spending, make sure you're subscribed. I'm going back through the historical record every week, pulling out what works and putting it here where you can actually use it. Drop a comment and tell me which pest has been giving you the most trouble this season. I want to know what you're dealing with, and I've probably already got something that addresses it. They can close the library. They can pull the funding from the extension programs. They can keep putting the chemical solutions on the end cap display at eye level and the traditional knowledge in a footnote nobody reads. But they cannot stop you from walking to a tree, cutting a branch, and growing food the way it was grown before any of this became an industry. That knowledge is yours now. Use it.